you get logged in, and then we'll, okay. You ready? Okay. I'm calling to order this regular board meeting for the Council Bluffs Community School District Board of Directors. Before us now, we have a public hearing regarding the extension of the Instructional Support Levy. And let the record show that all members of the board except Mr. Grove are present. We will be reviewing a presentation by Mr. Wilson regarding the extension of the Instructional Support Levy, and board members will have an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the presentation, and so we'll proceed.
Mr. Wilson will be presenting tonight for the district on the Instructional Support Levy. Mr. Wilson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Murillo. Thank you, Board. Tonight we want to talk about the Instructional Support Levy. It is a component of the property tax levy that we currently have in place. It was originally designed to give schools additional educational opportunities and funding. The Instructional Support Levy can be financed by one of two ways, or a combination of the both, income surtax or property tax. Our school district does not have an income surtax, although many of our neighboring districts do, and we chose to fund it through the property tax route. And it does provide additional spending authority for our district, which we'll get to here in a moment. It was originally enacted in 1990, way back when, in the early 90s, as they say. It was renewed by the voters in 95 and 2000, and then in 2005 for a period of 10 years. The ISL was approved by voters in 2012 and effective through June of 2016, and at that time what they did is actually increase the instructional support levy amount that the district was able to get. The board extended the ISL in January 2015 through June of 2021. This is a chart here that shows the ISL revenue history. You will notice there's a middle column there called state aid. Originally, as it was designed, the state was matching a certain amount that the district was supplying through property taxes or income surtax, but as time went on, that dwindled down, and now they give us nothing. What's kind of interesting, though, is on the aid and levy worksheet that you approved for the budget for next year, there was a component that was in there, assuming that the state was going to fund it, but they always take it out at the last minute. We currently have about nearly $4 million of property tax and corresponding spending authority for this. So it is a really important part of our funding for the education of our children. Extend the ISL, we can do this one of two ways. A simple majority of approval by the voters is required, which allows you to have it for 10 years. Or the board can approve an extension for a 5-year period of time, which was done the last time. In 2005 and 2012, you can see on there that just over 60% of the voters voted to extend the ISL into the future. So we feel that there's good community support for this. We recommend that the board consider voting an extension of the ISL beginning with the year June 2022 all the way through June 2026, I guess that would be. And the reasons for it is that many of the school districts in Iowa who have the ISL in place routinely have their boards extend this because spending authority is such an important component of it. Fees for holding a special election, which we'd have to do, would be about $13,000 for this. And as I said, we generate about $4 million of spending authority from the ISL. Property taxes do not increase under this. It is still a component of our current property levy, so it would roughly stay the same moving forward. And with that, I stand here to answer any questions you may have.
Questions from the board?
So if we've had community support the last 2 elections, why would we transition to a board vote?
Well, we'd had the board vote the last time.
Correct.
The second reason is we do not want to incur fees for a special election, but more importantly, with $4 million of spending authority on the line, I recommend this option rather than going to the voters.
Can you expand a little bit more on that? Why the voters wouldn't support that? Is it the volume of the dollar or?
I'm just saying, if they wouldn't support it, we could be facing a $4 million reduction in funding, which we have to make some serious cuts for.
It wouldn't change their property levy.
No, well, if we took it out, if they did not support it, it would reduce the
But
property levy.
When we expanded that levy in 13,
Mm-hmm.
we were moving some money out of another piece of it. We put it all in the ISL.
Correct. Right.
Before, the other piece was two separate components.
You could look at it that way.
Yeah.
You could look at it that way.
Sounds
One
like
was,
we-
so where it was, Troy, was in the cash reserve levy, and the cash reserve levy does not give us any spending authority.
That one was voter approved? Would be or no, that was just there?
The one that we did the last time was board approved, but prior to that, it was voter
I
approved.
mean, the cash reserve levy.
That's always done when the board passes the annual budget in April.
Okay, so we took a piece that was tied to that and put it all in the ISL now, which was $2.9 million difference or something like that. So suddenly we put more weight on this because of that. Be mine.
Yeah, it was essentially, you're exactly right. We shifted from an area that did not have spending authority to an area that does have spending authority.
Because I think that's why lots of districts that do this, just, they do a 5-year vote on it. Expands.
So can you talk about the process if enough signatures are obtained? What's the process after that?
If the voters would vote for it?
If
If we
it
put it on the
was-
ballot?
If it was
option B
challenged.
Oh, it was challenged. So there is a percentage of the voters from the last election that if they gather enough signatures, they could override the
Board
the
approved.
board's vote, and they would have to have an election for it,
Which would cost us?
which would cost us money.
Is it the same process if we decided to go the income surtax route?
That is a little bit of a different vote. It's my understanding that on income surtax, the board could vote for that, but the board has shied away from doing so because they didn't want to pull money out of another pot and have the taxpayers have another burden on them, I should say.
What portion of the property tax levy does ISL account for?
Dollar-wise, about $1.69.
Percentage.
Percentage.
Oh, about a little less than 10%,
So about $1, a
$1.69.
little over $1.
And originally it was like 2%, or maybe it was a tiny portion.
Yeah.
Or when we threw them together, maybe it was bigger.
So you can, what they do is they have you, on the aid and levy worksheet, you can have a maximum up to 10%. Before we did this, there's around 4 or 5.
Any other questions? Hearing none, we will close this portion of the public hearing, and we will take this up during the regular board meeting. The next public hearing that we have is the public hearing for the 2018-19 budget amendment. And we'll move forward with that.
Okay, thank you. This is a compliance area for the board that they must do every year according to Iowa code. And essentially what it means is that if there are components of the budget that you passed last year for the current year, the 18-19 budget, that are going to exceed even by a penny, you have to do a budget amendment for this. What's interesting, though, is they don't bring revenues into this. It's just the expenditure side. So the amendment that we're doing is for all funds that we have, except the health insurance fund. It aggregates everything together, and there's an instructional component, and then there are support services components, there's a facility component, and then a nutrition component. So what they've asked us to do, essentially, is estimate where we're going to be at June 30th of this year. So we run reports, analyze it to see where we're going to be, and then we do the budget amendment for this. So actual results may vary, as they say. Okay, so this has no impact on property taxes or revenues. We don't get any more money if we increase the amendment. As I said, it's more of a compliance issue by Iowa code. If you look at, oh, it might help if I gave you the right screen there. I apologize. The area of concern that we're looking at is for the facilities. And the reason that we're looking at this, and I clicked this screen here, you have it in your board docs there, I apologize for this. We estimated last year we'd spent about $4.1 million on facility costs last year. Well, because of the Madison campus and the middle school project and everything, it's gonna be probably closer to $9 million before year end. I actually inflated it just a little bit more so we would not go over that amount. The funding for it is already in place. We sold the general revenue bonds, we sold the general obligation bonds, we sold the revenue bonds. And so we have the funding in place for this. As I said, when they have you do a budget amendment, they look at your costs, not your revenues at the same time. So what we're looking at doing is asking the board to approve a budget amendment to increase the facilities component from $4.15 million to $9 million. And with that, I'll take any questions that you may have.
And in the packet, it said, detailed statement of additional receipts, taxes, balances, blah, 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 would be available at the hearing. Is there a breakdown of this, or is it just that line item?
It's just a line item. Yeah, when I looked at it, Troy, I looked at all of our costs through April, and I try to extrapolate out where we're going to be through June based upon the expected contractor draws, and I bumped it up a little bit more to make sure that it doesn't go over. Now, it still could, but
And this is through the end of 19.
this is through the end of June of 2019.
Right, so we're more earlier than we thought we were. We're necessarily spending all this originally.
Well, right, because back in April of 2018, when we did this, we didn't buy the building, we didn't know what our estimates were gonna be, exactly at the time. So now that we're into the year, we can more finely tune it.
Questions? Hearing none. Again, we will take this up during our regular board meeting, and with that, the public hearing is closed unless there is anybody who wishes to address the board regarding the instructional support levy or the budget amendment. Okay, seeing none, we will close the public hearing and then directly go to our regular scheduled board meeting. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Minshaw?
Present.
Mr. Arthur?
Present?
Mr. LaFurla?
Present.
Mr. McGlade?
Present.
Dr. Ogres? Mr. Kazire?
Present. And now, as you are able, please rise with me to observe a moment of silence. Please join with me the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have a motion to approve the agenda.
Move approval of the agenda.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, same sign. And the agenda for this evening has been approved. Next up is the approval of our previous work session and workshop meetings of March or May 14th. Is there a motion?
Yeah, I will move approval of the minutes of the work session and workshop meeting on 5/14.
Thank you.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll move to the vote to approve the minutes for the last meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye,
Aye.
and opposed, same sign, and the motion is carried. Now is the time for our public participation. Members of the audience who wish to address the board, now is the time and place for you to do that. If you wish to address the board, please present yourself at the podium, state your name, and those who haven't called in will get 3 minutes. Seeing no movement, we will move on to our superintendent's report.
Thank you, Mr. Kozire. At this time, I'd like to invite Ms. Ostrowski to the podium. She will be recognizing a few students this evening and also recognizing our Employees of the Year. Ms. Ostrowski, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.
Pleased tonight to have invited 2 of our graduates here for this portion of recognition, and each of them is receiving honors, well, one for 2 reasons and one for 3. So first, I would invite Ariana Bagley to join Dr. Murillo here at the podium. Ariana? Ariana and Kate has been named by Abraham Lincoln High School as an Iowa Scholar. And when are you getting honored by the governor? Did you already do that? Okay, so she has already been honored by Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds as being a State of Iowa Scholar. We are very proud of you. And she has also earned the platinum level on the National Career Readiness Certificate, and we all got to celebrate some of her peers at the last meeting, but she was busy, and we are so pleased to be able to honor you tonight. Congratulations. And her peer, Caleb Fitch, is here to be recognized as well. Caleb was also named an Iowa Governor's Scholar, and he has earned the platinum level of the National Career Readiness Certificate, and each of them will receive their stars delivered to their home. And I wanted to mention also with Caleb, Caleb has also been named an Omaha World Herald Western Iowa Scholar, and on the academic team that the World Herald names annually. So he's representing our community and Abraham Lincoln High School very well, and we wish you both the best of luck. Congratulations. I will note that we were able to give them their stars prior to their graduation parties, so they were able, thankfully, to display them and create lots of great conversation, I'm sure. So, all right. We also have with us today 3 students from Abraham Lincoln High School who earned honors at the State History Day Fair and will be representing our school district and our community at the National History Day competition. We're very excited to welcome today. I'll start with Anna Newby. Anna, would you join Dr. Murillo? Anna won the individual senior division documentary category, and her entry was entitled The Few, the Proud, the Navajo Code Talkers. Congratulations, Anna. Our next recipient is Ashley Hipner. She won the individual senior division exhibit entitled When Pigs Fly, How 36 Hogs Saved Japan. And Brianne McDermott has not only been invited to the National
it's going to cost the girls about $1,000 each to go, even with cheap air flights. And so we're having a bake sale in the AL Teachers Lounge on Friday. You may get your car washed at Sherwin-Williams on Saturday from 10 to noon. And we will take care of your after-church meal on Sunday from 11:30 to 1 at Emmanuel Lutheran Church. Please bring your pocketbooks. We have a silent auction as well.
And that was Deb Masker, and as many of you know, Mrs. Masker has taken the role of coach and instructor and cheerleader very seriously for our entries into the national, both, I should say, regional, state, and national fairs. So congratulations to you, Mrs. Masker, as well. We'll move on to our Employees of the Year recognition. How exciting. Once a year, we get a chance to celebrate those individuals who stand out among their peers, who've been nominated to represent them as our District of the Year honorees. We will start tonight with Mr. Gary Sullivan, our Support Staff Member of the Year. Gary? Gary is a paraprofessional at Roosevelt Elementary School, and I'm going to share with you just a brief bit of what his nominators shared with us. Gary arrives early each morning to read about new ways to work with and motivate students. He then greets each and every student with a handshake, high five, dance, or song before they enter the building. He then cheerfully reads the morning announcements, giving students shout-outs, kindness challenges, or sharing of motivational quotes. He is attentive to the students in the classroom, patiently motivating and assisting each of them. He oversees lunch duty with his cheerful spirit. Teachers often find notes of appreciation from him in their mailboxes or desks. His love and dedication to students is very evident in all that he does, and we are very proud to call him our Support Staff Member of the Year. And Gary is joined tonight by his wife, Helen, and Principal of Roosevelt, Brett Abbotts, and Sam, Kim Castellano, and probably others. I know there are others who are here to celebrate him and recognize him for this honor. Our licensed staff member of the month, or of the year, which is even better, is Becky Liston from Edison Elementary School. Becky Liston exemplifies the Achieve More rallying cry of the Council Bluffs School District. Becky's why for teaching is to make sure students feel safe and loved. Becky positively impacts the students and staff at Edison by holding herself, teammates, and students to the highest expectations. Mrs. Liston understands and responds to the individual needs of her students, her kindergarten students. Her students have responded by achieving more in her classroom. Her students consistently score in the 80s and 90s on the FAST and MAP assessments. She is a tremendous model of how to reflect and respond to student achievement. She collaborates with colleagues to find ways to motivate students in reading and math, and participates in a variety of building-wide events to engage students, especially in reading. Mrs. Liston is amazing in the way she balances student achievement while building supportive relationships with her students and families. Becky is #all in for Edison and the Council Bluffs Community School District. Congratulations. And Becky is joined here tonight by her husband, as well as Principal of Edison, Mike Naughton. And before I turn the microphone over to Mr. Mark Schultz to announce our Principal of the Year, I would like to say that we are very pleased to have as a partner our Council Bluffs Schools Foundation, who supports our monthly and yearly teacher and staff recognition program. Through their generosity, we're able to provide them, and I'll invite you to, while we're transitioning, to pull your awards out because we'll want them in a photo, okay? And the foundation has also generously provided a $500 check to each of you. No spending it on the kids. Yes, please.
It was so nice when I got to Becky's classroom, the kindergartners, when we came in, because we had a candy bouquet, they were like, whoa, all that candy, and they really thought it was for all of them. And then they started cheering and hugging her, which was so awesome. And then Mr. S, when we got there to his classroom, he was just involved in tutoring and working with students, didn't even look up and notice we were all in the room. So it was just really nice. So I'll turn this over to Mr. Schultz to introduce our principal.
Thank you, Dr. Merlo. Good evening, members of the board. It is my pleasure to recognize Mr. Mike Naughton as our 2019 Principal of the Year from Edison Elementary. So I'd like to read a few of the comments that Mr. Naughton's peers and nominators had to say. Mike Naughton is an extraordinary colleague to learn from and grow with. When walking into Edison, you will see organization and evidence of student achievement. This is located on the walls, but also in every classroom. Mr. Naughton is an inspiration to his staff and his colleagues. The success he has gained with academic achievement makes us all ask, what is going on at Edison, and how can I come and watch? When he speaks at district meetings, he is thoughtful and articulate. Others focus on the words and want to know what he is thinking. Mr. Naughton is well-rounded and supports all stakeholders in the building, as well as the community. I'm grateful for the time and effort he has taken with me as I learn and grow. I continue to have excitement for upcoming years, knowing that he is a colleague focused on helping all students in the Council Bluffs schools achieve more and reach their full capacity. Mike is joined this evening by his wife Jamie and his 4 children, Addie, Jack, Elsa, and Noah. Congratulations, Mike.
Thank you all for being here with us to recognize those individuals that do so much for our students and for our community. Okay, with that, we will move on to the resolution portion of our meeting. First up is an agreement with for the Head Start services. Is there a motion?
Move to approve agreement with West Central Community Action for Head Start services for the 2019-2020 school year.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second?
Motion and a second. Any discussion?
So have we still not heard anything on the
We
Head
have
Start
not.
grant?
No.
Hmm.
And so we believe that the best course is to go ahead and get a agreement in place to continue the services that we already have and look at next steps.
Do we see that as any sort of, I guess, pushback against the funding of these, or?
I don't see it as a pushback of funding, because when either delegates, grantees, or partners, the grantee is West Central. And because they have gone into negotiations, it could mean that they receive less funding this year, which then in turn, they would have to offer less funding to the partners that run programs for them. We'll soon know, exactly, you know, after the negotiations are over, we can provide an update on what that looks like.
There's no further discussion. We'll move to the vote for the approval of the agreement with West Central Community Action for Head Start Services. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Yes, I've opened online voting too.
Thank you.
Dr. Ogres?
Yes.
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw?
Yes.
Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla?
Yes.
Mr. Kazire?
Yes, and the motion is passed. Before us now is the approval of the instructional support levy extension. Do we have a motion?
Yeah, I move that the Board of Directors authorizes continued participation in the instructional support program as provided in Iowa Code Sections 257.18 through 257.21 for a period of 5 years, commencing with the fiscal year ending in June 30, 2022.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll move to the vote on the approval of the instructional support levy extension. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Dr. Ogres?
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw?
Yes.
Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla?
Yes.
Mr. Kazire?
Yes, and the motion has been approved. For us now, we have policies that are before us for the first reading. Is there a motion?
I'll move approval of the first reading of the policies as presented in the packet.
Thank
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion?
I did have a question on the, couple things. The electronic messaging wording that was added. It says, between staff and students shall include 2 adults on any message to a student. Is that 2 of our people, or is that them and the parent and the child, or what is the?
No, that was a policy that we looked at and reviewed this year, and if a coach or a teacher is texting students, there must be another adult or employee on the text. So like, most of the time you'll have coaches or band directors or orchestra, that are telling students that there's practice or maybe practice got canceled, that we always want to have, an assistant or a vice principal or principal on that text as they're communicating, and there should be no one-on-one personal communication between our staff and a student. There should always be 2 adults. Now, a parent on there would be great too, if they're part of the group messaging, but if a student, where we grew concerned about was, maybe if a student just wrote back and asked me some questions about practice and started a private conversation, we're asking that the coach or the director would then include another adult, one of the assistant coaches, on that text as they respond, just to cover and protect and keep all environments safe.
Enforcement of this looks like,
Well, it's gonna be a lot of training, and then, with the belief and hope that our, staff members understand how important this is, safety for our students and safety for
them.
themselves. Diane, did I miss anything?
It might be important to note that a text is very specific. That is a personal device to a personal device kind of communication. That's why we felt as a committee that we wanted to recommend this. Now, if a student and teacher are communicating via email, that is something that we as a district can monitor and search. And the same is true on social media for the most part. So text was a very kind of unique animal and very personal, and we felt like this was a guidance to put in place, again, as Dr. Murillo said, to protect.
Do we think that there will be a formal type of application or process to get away from text messaging between district employees and students?
Well, the only other type of sure, there's a lot. And so we're talking about, I mean, when I think of social media, like instant messaging on Facebook or private message box on Twitter. I'm also thinking of personal email accounts. But we will do the training, we will set the standard and put the policy in place, and then.
Worry that it's on employees' personal devices
Mhm.
and There has to be, in this day and age of technology, there has to be a better means of communication between teammates, orchestra people, band people, so that it's not on an employee's personal device. There has to be a better way for that type of communication to be disseminated in a massive, or even if it has to be one-on-one with another coach, which in some sports and activities, there's only one coach. So now you're involving an administrative level.
The way we would love to see this go is that they use they use the district email, because then that is something that we provided for them, and the students also have a district email account.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that when you're out at a field or you're at home and driving and seeing the weather change or what have you, and you've got to cancel practice, to have a group text set up is probably the easiest and most convenient way for most coaches to use. But we will definitely encourage them. That way they're not using their own personal device. But we live in this technology age where everybody has one of these, and they could even set up a group kind of email system that they could also do that off of their phone. So we'll continue to push in that direction. But we know it's going to be hard to change that culture because it is out there and.
Well, that's
the
how it
first
got
level.
started. I mean, that was how electronic communication, and Mr. Fringer can certainly weigh in because he's way more of an expert than I am, but that's how technology got started. That's how we started to communicate. It was either phone calls or texting. And then all these social media apps started to come out, and there was other means of communicating. But I just think, and I don't know what other districts are doing. My husband's a coach. I get it. They text each other. But I just think for safety purposes, it shouldn't be to personal cell phone numbers. It should be more to a school-based application or account, whatever that could be.
It sends it out there.
Correct, as the same alertness as a text message, but not from my personal cell phone number or my account.
Well, I would agree with that as well, but I mean, should they use their personal devices? We
Well,
need
they
to-
are.
Right,
They
right,
have
but I
their
mean,
school stuff on here too, right?
exactly, but we need to have some process in place so that we make sure that we're protecting the employees and that we're protecting the students. So it may be more convenient at one point in time to use a text. And if we have that process in place, that gives them guidance on how to utilize it.
Google Voice is an option to not use your actual cell phone number, and it's a different number that you can just use for a specific purpose. So we can talk a different time.
But I think what you're saying, Dave, is even if we did have those systems in place, we'd still want a policy like this.
I think so.
But right now, as the policy stands, they're still allowed to text.
And you would prefer
Yeah, but with
a
some,
policy that would eliminate that.
I think if the technology is available and there's something else that we may not be aware of, I would love to hear more about it.
do all teachers and coaches have district email on their phones, or is that available?
It's available, but we have never required them to load it on their phones.
You probably can't require them.
We don't pay for it. Well, something that the policy committee could kind of research for us and pull in Mr. Fringer, because Mr. McGlade kind of brought out something I'd never heard of. So I appreciate that, yes. Thank you.
And then there was, in the, I believe it's in the social media portion, they pulled out kind of all kind of social media use policy. Just kind of took all that information out of there, and we're just saying, hey, folks, be prudent and ethical. I mean, is that,
We are, as a committee, recommending that that be pulled out into a separate administrative regulation. So at the next meeting, what you'll see is essentially that same language into a regulation which helps guide or shows the procedures for implementing the policy. That was the committee's recommendation. So it'll now be, what's the number for?
432 is the
It'll be
employee use of social media.
432.1, and will be a supporting document to the policy that states the rationale and then the procedure will be in and of itself in the regulation. So,
If there's no further discussion, we'll move forward with the vote on the resolution to approve the first reading of the policies as presented in the packet. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Mr. LaFurla,
Yes.
Mr. Arthur,
Yes.
Dr. Ogres,
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw,
Yes.
Mr. McGlade,
Yes.
Mr. Kazire.
Yes, and the motion has been approved. Before us now, we have policies that are before us for the second reading. Is there a motion? Policies and then as well as procedures, since the procedures only require a single vote. Is there a motion?
Yeah, then I can move that we approve the policies presented to the board for second reading, accompanied by the corresponding administrative regulations which require only one reading prior to approval.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll move forward to the approval of the policies for the second reading and as well as the administrative regulations. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Arthur,
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla,
Yes.
Dr. Ogres,
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw,
Yes.
Mr. McGlade,
Yes.
Mr. Kazire.
Yes, and the motion has been approved. Now we have a resolution for the approval of the tentative list of graduates.
I'll move to approve the tentative list of graduates for the class of 2019.
Thank you very much. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, before us we have a resolution to approve the tentative list of graduates for the 2019 graduating class. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Minshaw,
Yes.
Mr. McGlade,
Yes.
Dr. Ogres,
Yes.
Mr. Arthur,
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla,
Yes.
Mr. Kazire.
Yes, and the motion has been approved. Next, we have a contract. Approval, is there a motion?
Yeah, I can move that the board approve a 1.5% increase in base wages for standard employees and administrators for the 2019-2020 school year.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll move to the vote on the approval of the 2019-2020 contract increases for standard employees and administrators. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Arthur,
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw,
Yes.
Dr. Ogres,
Yes.
Mr. McGlade,
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla,
Yes.
Mr. Kazire.
Yes, the motion has been approved. Now we have the continuation of our superintendent's employment contract. We have a motion.
Move to approve the continuation of the superintendent's employment contract with the Council Bluffs Community School District as presented.
Thank you.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll move to the vote for the approval of the continuation of Dr. Murillo's employment contract. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Dr. Ogres,
Yes.
Mr. Arthur,
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla,
Yes.
Mr. McGlade,
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw,
Yes.
Mr. Kazire.
Yes, and with that, thank you.
Stuck.
We appreciate the work that you're doing on behalf of the students of the Council Bluffs Community School District, and we look forward for continued success. Now is that approval of the 2018-2019 budget amendment. Is there a motion?
I'll move approval of the amended 2018-19 certified budget as presented.
Thank you for that motion. A second.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll move to approve the 2018-2019 budget amendment. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Mr. LaFurla,
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw,
Yes.
Dr. Ogres.
Yes.
Mr. McGlade,
Yes.
Mr. Arthur,
Yes.
Mr. Kazire.
Yes, and the motion has been approved. We have some job description revisions. Is there a motion?
I move the board approve the revisions to job descriptions as presented in the packet.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion?
And these are just aligning with the portion that have already been changed to this terminology.
Flattening the organization.
We'll move to the vote then. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll for the resolution to approve job description revisions?
Mr. Arthur,
Yes.
Dr. Ogres.
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla,
Yes.
Mr. McGlade,
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw,
Yes.
Mr. Kazire.
Yes, and the motion has been approved. We have an agreement with some technology technology partners. Is there a motion?
I'll move that the board approves the invoice and agreement with Education Technology Partners as presented.
Second?
Motion and a second. Any discussion?
I just want to know more about it. Is that possible? I know Tim's been wanting to talk. You can feel it.
This would be Chief Hamilton, is that right?
Do you have specific questions, or do you just want me to go through the process of?
What do you hope this provides the district?
Well, when we've been talking about mental health, and I'll call it social emotional wellness, we have things in place to help kids. What I'm really looking for in this, and I think what the district is looking for in this, and what our lead team is looking for, is just like our universal tier of how are we going to support all kids. And trauma-informed schools is what we thought was the best approach. And Edison Elementary, Carter Lake, and TJ had already done a little bit of work into this. So this is a program that we could use, and the reason why we're going with an online program is we could ensure that all schools are getting the same information and the same training, so we can be consistent with it. So it truly is a district initiative rather than a school initiative.
Mr. Hamilton, also talk about how schools are gonna have the flexibility to roll this out as it best fits their building, and that their teachers will have time to look at this and then come back and do the feedback?
Absolutely. So the program is essentially it's a 2-year process. The training for the first year is a little over 10 hours. So we've gone to schools to say, especially with new principals coming in, I didn't want to dictate to the principals that you would do track 1 by, October 1st or what. So we've said that they need to get through the first half of the training by the end of the year. So we're really letting it up to those lead teams in each building, which will be doing training in June and July, 2 different dates. We're leaving it up to those lead teams to determine what's best for their school. How are they going to get to the end? We're saying this is where you need to be by the end of the first year, and it's up to the schools to determine what's best for them to get there.
So where are we doing this currently? Which schools?
Edison piloted the Trauma-Informed Online Academy, the work of, which is brought to you by Heather Forbes. Heather Forbes is really the leader in trauma-informed care. Carter Lake and TJ had already started the process as well, so we're bringing the online program to those schools.
Okay.
And maybe for the public, what is trauma-informed care?
So essentially what trauma-informed care is being able to take students with whatever needs that they have, knowing that everybody in life has what we would call traumas, whether that's, and it affects kids differently. So it could be something like divorce or mental health issues, or there's a number of different factors that go in there. So really what it is it's being able to take those kids, work with them so they can achieve at their highest level, and we can recognize what supports that they need. And really it's that universal tier to say, okay, we're gonna take all kids. Some kids are gonna need extra support than others, just like in reading or math. This is our universal tier to say, this is how we're going to treat all kids when they come to us.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Chief, thank
Any other questions? Before us now is an approval of the agreement with Education Technology Partners. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Mr. LaFurla,
Yes.
Mr. Arthur,
Yes.
Dr. Ogres.
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw,
Yes.
Mr. McGlade,
Yes.
Mr. Kazire.
Yes, and the motion has been approved. Now we have the annual technology bid. Is there a motion?
Move to approve the invoice and agreement with Education Technology Partners as presented.
Oh, we're on the next.
Okay,
Yep.
no, you're good.
Be it resolved to award bid 19-017 for the annual technology purchase to CDWG in the amount of $690,000.
Thank you for that motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Before us now is the approval of a resolution to accept the annual technology bid from CDW-G. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Dr. Ogres.
Yes.
Mr. Arthur,
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw,
Yes.
Mr. McGlade,
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla,
Yes.
Mr. Kazire.
Yes, and the motion has been approved. Next now is memorandum of understanding for some programs in the Tradeworks Academy pre-apprenticeship program. Is there a motion?
I move we approve the memorandum of understanding with Amped Electricity LLC, Hardy Electric Inc., AirServe Heating and Air Conditioning, and Owen Industries for sponsorship of the Tradeworks Academy pre-apprenticeship programs.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion?
For those organizations that are willing to step forward and do that.
So these start right away in the fall, and then do we have kids already identified there and start working with right away, or how's that gonna work?
And I could invite Dr. Worthman to the podium. I just want him to come because I want to brag a little bit about the work that him and Mr. Hans have done to really pull in the workforce to create these pre-apprenticeship MOUs. And it wasn't easy, because most of the time they just want to say we're pre-apprenticeship, but I really wanted an MOU, so we had something in writing. And Dr. Worthman has done a wonderful job getting all of this information together. So you want to just highlight a little bit?
Sure. So the pre-apprenticeship programs will align with each of the 5 areas of the Tradeworks Academy. We have a couple more that we'll probably be bringing to you next month. The pre-apprenticeship outlines the training and educational component of a registered apprenticeship. And it allows students to accelerate through an apprenticeship and gives them basically the option of doing our coursework and making sure that it is an articulated alignment with what Iowa Western is offering through a registered apprenticeship with each one of these programs. So in order for these companies to commit to providing our students with a pre-apprenticeship, they also have offered to provide a registered apprenticeship that follows it, which is a really big deal.
And what is really great, Dr. Borthman, is when I can look through the different sections and see the outcomes that our students are going to achieve through the pre-apprenticeship programs. These are some fabulous opportunities for our students and the partnership with our community. So thank you again for the work that you've done on this.
I have one more question. So when they, after the pre-apprenticeship, when they're offering the apprenticeship, is that, so this is from the Tradeworks Academy, will that be when they're juniors and seniors?
So it's a partnership between the sponsor, Iowa Western Community College, and the Council of School District. We do a lot of the front work, and then we also articulate our programs into the Iowa Western programs so that there's a seamless transition for our students. And that's a requirement of each one of these pre-apprenticeship programs. This is not just we took something off the shelf and wrote it down. These have all been deemed as high-quality pre-apprenticeship programs and then signed off by the U.S. Department of Labor.
So then it's said in there that they're gonna develop joint curriculum?
Correct. We
How's
have
that-
joint
how's that
curriculum
work?
with Iowa Western. So what we did
Iowa
is
Western,
we
okay.
laid out we sat with the business sponsors, Iowa Western Community College and the school district. We laid out what our objectives were for the Tradeworks Academy. Iowa Western outlined what they were going to provide students the junior, senior year in those diploma and certificate programs. And the companies identified the outcomes they wanted students to achieve as a result of that training. And so it's really the combination of a fully aligned programs so that we can meet the needs of both higher education, but also business and industry and our workforce.
Thank you.
Dr. Whitman.
There's no further discussion. We'll move forward with the approval of the Tradeworks Academy Pre-Apprenticeship Program Memorandum of Understanding. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Arthur,
Yes.
Mr. McGlade,
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw,
Yes.
Dr. Ogres,
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla,
Yes.
Mr. Kazire.
Yes, and the motion has been approved.
Sorry.
That's all right. We knew you had us covered. Before us now is a resolution for the appointment of parent members to the Special Education Advisory Committee.
I'll move that the board appoints parents to serve on the Special Education Advisory Committee as presented in the packet.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion?
So I know this had kind of come up in the community recently, and what was the process for folks to be either nominated for this or how they had to go on this committee, and then do we feel it's a good cross-section of,
I do.
to represent the needs of our students?
Yeah, and Dr. Worthing can kind of.
We're looking both for volunteers and to meet some criteria. So as always, with most things that we do that are stipulated by Iowa code, we try to make sure that we hit a wide cross-section. So you'll notice that there are students from both of our feeder patterns. There are students, parents of students in both of our feeder patterns. Without going into a lot of detail, different levels of needs of students. And different experiences that students may have in the full continuum of our special education services. So all the way from level 3 all the way down to level 1. And we also really looked at this being a commitment that will go into next school year. So we were looking at transition periods. Did we have them covered? And parents who may have one or more of their children go through our programs. So we asked for our lead teams to nominate people who have been ambassadors for students with disabilities or advocates, and then we sent out a blanket asking for if any of those people would be interested in making the commitment to serve. And so what you see in front of you, we wanted to keep a number about 10 or so, because they will also be working with staff members as a committee of about 20 to review the continuum of service, and then they'll provide ongoing feedback to the department. Which one of the things we wanted to improve in the future was making sure that we had that open line of communication between special education parents and families and the school district to receive regular feedback. It's
So
also
when-
part of the special education action plan.
So when the service delivery plan is created out of this, will there also be then a outreach to all or a larger population of parents to make sure that, I guess, we're meeting all needs?
There will not be. These people will serve as representatives of the parents and community members, and then there will also be reviewed by staff members, and then ultimately it will come back to you as elected members of the public to review it, and then it will also be reviewed by the area education agency as well before it is stamped off for 5 more years.
Okay.
If there are no further questions, we'll move to the vote for the appointment of parent members to the Special Education Advisory Committee. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Mr. LaFurla,
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw,
Yes.
Dr. Ogres,
Yes.
Mr. McGlade,
Yes.
Mr. Arthur,
Yes.
Mr. Kazire.
Yes, and the motion has been approved. Next is a partnership agreement with the YMCA preschool program.
Move to approve the Board of Directors approves the 2019-20 28E agreement with the Council Bluffs YMCA for a preschool partnership.
Second?
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll move to the vote for the approval of the YMCA preschool partnership agreement. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Dr. Ogres?
Yes.
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw?
Yes.
Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla?
Yes.
Mr. Kazire?
Yes, and the motion has been approved. Now we have one last resolution in the resolution section for the expansion of the CEP program. Is there a motion?
We'll move to approve the CEP program across all district school buildings for the 2019-20 school year.
You know, I will second this most incredible thing for our
Unbelievable.
community.
Yes.
Yeah. And probably somebody should talk about it so people watching at home understand. And then put it up in the news and.
And I've asked Ms. Stewart to be here tonight, because she's been working closely with the state, and we conducted a self-audit, and then the state also did an audit, a random sampling. So, Ms. Stewart, if you'd kind of explain kind of the CEP and what this means for our district for
Sure.
next year.
So I think it's important to note that the numbers are significantly higher than in previous years due to the addition of the state's addition to classify Medicaid in the directly certified student population. So it's not all divisions of Medicaid, but there are different divisions. What those are, I'm not well versed in, but those that qualified for Medicaid free are included in this year's numbers. So that was added in last year in March. So what really this confirms is what we've always known to be true, that there was those students that qualified based on direct certification. Those students are already receiving benefits from the state, some sort of assistance. But then there was a greater population that was living on the bubble, that was eligible through income. So the numbers qualified us for not only for all buildings to be eligible, but for the maximum reimbursement from the state. We will have to bring out no funds, no non-federal funds to cover addition of any building, which is the best outcome that we could ask for.
We talked about what a typical cost savings this could be, maybe for a family that has 2 children.
Sure, absolutely. If you look at a high school student, it's about a $900 savings per student. So you look at doubling that for 2 students at AL, $1,800 savings for a family. Quite significant. I know myself, having 2 kids in school, that would save me quite a bit of money. And so, but not only will this provide free breakfast and free lunch to all students in the district across the board, but it opens us up for additional nutrition funding opportunities for the 2021 school year. Those things include fresh fruit and vegetable programs across the board. So currently we have them at 9 buildings. For this coming school year, it would open all 11 elementaries open to that. It would also provide nutrition education available across the board at all of our elementary buildings. It would also allow us to expand the summer meals program. Currently, we are about as far, Hoover is about as far east as we can go to offer those meals, but through CEP, we could have sites anywhere in the Council Bluffs School District area. So it really opens us up to other opportunities.
So will parents now need to close out their meal accounts?
No. That will still be something that we will still be collecting, the unpaid meal debt. We still have to track students. So students, just like they do now, they're still gonna have to put in their numbers. We still have to tie a meal to a student for verification purposes. That way we're not just saying we're feeding, 800 kids at AL when the enrollment's.
Also, Ms. Stewart, please mention for those watching and hear that this is something that we go year by year.
Absolutely.
It could change.
Sure.
So it's not a guarantee that this is forever.
Right, so we'll still go after the unpaid meal debt, similar to like we added Lewis and Clark last year, we've gone after that meal debt over the past year so that that debt is not erased. By agreeing to do CEP, it makes us eligible for 5 years. Eligible does not mean it's a guarantee. We have no reason to believe that the funding will change. However, if our numbers this next April 2020, don't reflect similar to what we have now as far as the students being directly certified, if we saw students fall off the directly certified list, it might change the financial reimbursement, which could impact whether or not we decide to keep it for the entire district, or if we would have to look at what schools to group again. It is good to note that each school themselves qualified this year independently. We could offer it, but if we offered it independently, we wouldn't get the same reimbursement rate. So by grouping them all together, because some schools would have a higher reimbursement rate than others, by grouping them all together, we don't have to keep that grouping. We can change it again. But again, just because we're eligible with this for 5 years does not mean that the reimbursement stays the same. It could change every year based on our student population.
Well, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for your work and your service and for following through and working with the state on this. I really appreciate all you do.
Thank you. Before us now, we have a resolution to approve the expansion of the CEP program throughout all buildings in the district. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Mr. LaFurla,
Yes.
Mr. Arthur,
Yes.
Mr. McGlade,
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw,
Yes.
Dr. Ogres,
Yes.
Mr. Kazire.
Yes, and the motion has been approved. Next before us is the resolution to approve our consent agenda. Is there a motion?
Move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Thank you.
I'll second that, and then say that we would like to gratefully acknowledge and accept donation from the Eagles Club, $500 to each school, including Kingsville and Tucker Center, for a total of $8,500.
Thank you.
This is amazing.
Thank you for that second and for that recognition of the Eagles Club for their generous contribution to the district. There's no further discussion. We'll move forward with the vote on the consent agenda. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
I will, but I'm having a little trouble here with this.
It's the computer, it's not you.
No, it's probably me. Here we go. So, and Mr. Arthur was the second one. Okay. I'm ready to go.
We're ready for the roll call.
Dr. Ogres?
Yes.
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla?
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw?
Yes.
Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
Mr. Kazire?
Yes, and the motion has been approved. Earlier, before this board meeting, we held a closed session because an employee requested a closed session for the evaluation of performance. At this time, do we need to continue that discussion? Seeing that we don't, we have met our requirements for this evening and completed our work. With that, we are adjourned.
My friend just texted me in Kansas City and said a tornado went right by his house.